Montana Territory, July 1883. The night she was thrown out, the stars were so bright it felt like they were showing off. Nella Oakley stood barefoot in the dust outside the saloon, her dress torn at the hem and her pride hanging by a thinner thread. The town of Red Flats had never been kind to her, but tonight it had turned cruel. Sheriff Colburn had not said much, just pointed to the edge of town, said she had until sundown to be gone. All because she said no. No woman turns down Mr. Halston, the sheriff had said. Not if she knows what's good for her. But Nella had turned him down. She had slapped his hand away when he tried to corner her in the back room of the mercantile, told him plain that she would never lie with a man like him, rich or not. And for that, she was banished. She tugged her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the wind picked up, her satchel clutched in one hand. She had nowhere to go. No one in Red Flats would speak for her, not when Halston owned half the buildings and paid the other half in favors. She walked until her feet felt raw, long past the town's edge, until the lights behind her disappeared and the moon painted the prairie in silver. When the sound of horse hooves came from behind, she turned with her hand tight around the handle of her satchel, jaw set. The rider pulled up slow. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, dust on his coat, and quiet in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked. She did not answer. He dismounted and stayed a few steps back, giving her space. "Name's Orin Ashford. I was just passing through when I saw you walking alone. It's late." She looked him over, wary. "You from Red Flats?" "No, just came in for supplies." He glanced at her bare feet. "You need help?" "I do not take charity." He nodded once, respectful. "Then how about a trade? I got a warm fire and coffee back at camp. You got a story, I reckon." "Fair deal." She hesitated. She had not eaten since morning. The night air was biting, and something about his voice, steady, low, made her feel safer than the town ever had. "Fine," she said, "but I do not owe you anything." "Would not want you to," he said, and led the way. His horse, a dun-colored gelding, followed without a lead. She walked behind them, the silence between them heavier than words. His camp was a simple set-up canvas tent, small fire, a pot of coffee already on. She sat on a worn blanket, stretching her legs out in front of the flames. Her feet were blistered and red. "Thank you," she said, softer now. He handed her a tin cup. "Want to tell me what happened?" She looked into the fire. "I refused a man. A rich one. He is used to getting what he wants." Orin studied her in the firelight. "And they punished you for that?" She nodded. He poured himself a cup and sat across from her. "You deserve better than that." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had not cried when they threw her out. Not when she walked barefoot for miles. But now her eyes burned. "People like him do not care what I deserve." "I do." She looked up. He meant it. She could tell. They stayed there until the fire burned low. He offered her the tent. He would sleep outside. She tried to argue, but he just tipped his hat and said, "I was raised right." She lay awake a long time, listening to the wind, the occasional rustle of orange shifting beneath his blanket. Come morning, he had coffee brewing again and bacon cooked over the fire. "What are you going to do now?" he asked as she ate. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have nothing. No land. No family." He looked thoughtful. "I have a small place west of here. Cabin, horses. Not much, but it is mine. Could use help fixing the barn before winter." She blinked. "You would take me in?" "I am not offering charity," he said. "I am offering a place where no one will treat you like less. You help with the work. I will share the food. That is fair, is it not?" She stared at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because someone should." She agreed before she could talk herself out of it. They rode out by noon, her behind him on the gelding. The air was warmer, the wind less sharp. At first, they did not talk much, but she watched the way he moved, quiet, careful, and slowly her shoulders began to ease. By the time they reached his land, she already knew she wanted to stay. The cabin sat in a wide stretch of valley, trees on one side, open plains on the other. A stream cut through the back, and 2 horses grazed in a fenced corral. He showed her where she could sleep, a cot near the hearth, and handed her a pair of boots that would fit better than her torn slippers. They fell into a rhythm quickly. She cooked. He chopped wood. They fixed the barn roof together, side by side on the beams, sun on their backs. One evening, 2 weeks in, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, he said, "You are not what they said you were." She looked at him. "What did they say?" That you were difficult, cold, prideful. She smiled, just a little. I am all those things. But not wrong. He chuckled. I like difficult. Keeps things honest. That night, they did not sleep far apart. He did not push. He just let his hand rest close to hers in the dark, and when she reached out, he folded his fingers around hers. For the first time in a long while, Nella slept through the night. And when she woke just before sunrise, his arm was around her, holding her close like she was something worth keeping. She did not pull away. The first frost came early that year, brushing the meadow grasses with white and turning the creek's edge brittle by dawn. Nella stood at the chopping block in the yard, splitting kindling into finer pieces. Her hands had toughened since she arrived, blisters long-healed, palms calloused to the grain of the axe handle. She liked the ache it left in her arms. It reminded her she was earning her place. Orin was near the corral, fixing a loose rail. The morning sun threw long shadows behind him, catching the movement of his shoulders as he worked. She caught herself watching him more often lately, not for protection anymore, but with a quiet curiosity. He moved like someone who'd learned the land by listening to it. I was thinking, he said, without looking up, if we patched the east fence this week, we could run the horses out farther come spring. More grass out that way? She asked, setting the axe aside. He nodded. And fewer rocks. Easier on their hooves. She brushed her hands on her apron. I could ride out there today. Mark where the fence line needs work. You ride? Better than I walk, she said, and he grinned. She saddled the mare he called Juniper, a patient bay with a white blaze and an easy gait. The ride east took her through a stretch of larch and cottonwood, the trees thinning where the land rose into hills. She rode slow, noting breaks in the old posts, where elk had likely passed through. By mid-morning, she dismounted to rest the horse and walked a while with her hand trailing along the fence wire. When she returned, smoke curled from the chimney. Orin had started a stew, and something in its smell tugged at her chest, not hunger, exactly, but a memory of belonging. At supper, she ladled the food into bowls while Orin cleaned the tools from the day. When he sat beside her at the table, his shirt was damp at the collar, and his hands smelled faintly of soap and cedar. Was it bad where you came from? He asked, not meeting her eyes. She hesitated. It was worse after I said no. He nodded slowly. You ever want to talk about it? I'll listen. I'm not sure I could get the words out right. Doesn't have to be right. Just honest. She looked at him then. He cornered me. Told me I ought to be grateful. Said I'd end up with less if I didn't take what was offered. And then he made sure I ended up with nothing. Orin's jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. Back then, she said, her voice steady, I thought maybe I was the one who'd done wrong. But I look around now, and I don't think that anymore. He reached across the table and rested his hand near hers, not touching, just there. You were never in the wrong. Not for choosing yourself. She inhaled slow, let it out through her nose. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. You don't have to decide tonight. Feels like I've been waiting a long time for something to begin. I just don't know what it's meant to be. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the flames in the hearth. Maybe it starts here, with a fence to mend, a roof to patch, two hands willing. That night, she stood outside while the stars came out, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Orin joined her after banking the fire. I used to think the stars looked cold, she said. But out here, they don't. They're the same stars, he said. Just a different place to see them from. She turned to him. You've been kind without asking anything back. I don't know what to make of that. I don't want anything you're not ready to give. I don't know what I'm ready for. That's all right. I'm not going anywhere. His words settled in her like the first warmth after a long freeze. She didn't say anything else, just leaned slightly into him, and he didn't move away. When they went inside, she didn't return to the cot. Instead, she sat beside him on the floor near the fire, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, the only sound the crackle of wood breaking apart into embers. He never reached for more than she offered. She never asked him to, and something between them shifted, not rushed, not spoken, but steady as the mountain wind outside. In the quiet, they began to build something neither of them had dared imagine. By late September, the wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow. The days shortened, and the land shifted, gold creeping into the cottonwoods, frost lacing the morning earth. Nella rose earlier now, her breath visible as she hauled water from the creek. She'd started wearing one of Orin's old wool shirts under her apron, the sleeves rolled and pinned at her elbows. It smelled faintly of saddle soap and wood smoke. Orin had taken to writing in the evenings, hunched over the small desk near the window with a pencil and sheets of coarse paper. She didn't ask what he was putting down, but he always folded the pages carefully and tucked them into a tin box when he finished. One night, as she was sewing a patch on the sleeve of his coat, he spoke without turning from the desk. "You ever hear anything from kin? Letters, maybe?" She shook her head. "None to send, none to receive." He looked at her then. "You ever think about going east?" She threaded her needle a second time before answering. "I left Tennessee on a wagon when I was 16. Passed through more towns than I care to count. Everyone felt like a place I'd already been. This one doesn't." He nodded, didn't press her further. She appreciated that. A week later, they rode out to a neighbor's homestead to help with butchering. The man, a widower named Baird, had a sow ready and needed extra hands. Orin offered Nella's help before asking, but she didn't mind. It was the first time she'd left their land since arriving. Baird's place was 3 miles west, tucked in a hollow rimmed with spruce. His daughter, Ruth, was 12 and sharp-eyed, her braids tied with twine. She followed Nella around with a quiet sort of curiosity. "You got a husband?" the girl asked bluntly as they rendered lard together. "No," Nella said. "Are you going to marry Orin?" Nella didn't look up. "That's not a question for children." Ruth grinned. "You make his coffee like you are." When they got home that evening, Nella carried the wrapped meat into the root cellar while Orin unsaddled the horses. The air between them felt different, not strained, but weighted. Inside, she lit the oil lamp and stirred the stew pot, her jaw tight. "She asked if I planned to marry you," she said. He paused in the doorway. "What did you tell her?" "That it wasn't her business." He stepped closer, voice quiet. "Is it yours?" She turned to face him. "I don't know what I am to you." His eyes held hers. "You're the one I wait for before I eat. The one I look for in the mornings. That enough for now?" She nodded, the tightness in her chest easing. "It is." In October, a letter came. Orin rode into town to fetch salt and flour, and when he returned, he had a folded envelope tucked into his coat pocket. He didn't open it until after supper. Nella watched him read it twice before setting it down on the table. "My brother's wife passed," he said. "Back in Nebraska. He's got 2 boys under 10 and no one to help." She waited. "He didn't ask me to come. Just said he thought I should know." She reached across the table, her fingers grazing his wrist. "Do you want to go?" He shook his head slowly. "I did enough leaving when I was young. It's taken me too long to find where I belong." The relief she felt surprised her. She didn't say anything, just stood and began to clear the bowls. Later, as they sat by the fire, she rested her head against his shoulder. He didn't say anything, only shifted to bring her closer. By November, they'd built a smokehouse and stacked the last of the split wood. Snow came in fits just a dusting at first, then heavier, until the world outside the cabin turned to white. One night, after a long silence, she asked, "You ever been in love?" He didn't answer right away. "Thought I was once. But we wanted different things." She wanted a town, neighbors, Sunday dresses. I wanted quiet. "Did it hurt?" "Not like this would." She looked up at him. "Why would this hurt?" "Because losing you would feel like cutting out part of myself." The fire crackled. She touched his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You won't lose me," she said. He took her face in his hands, slow and reverent, and kissed her unhurried, as if he'd waited all season for that moment. She kissed him back, steady and sure. That night, they lay beside each other beneath the quilt she'd pieced from old shirts and flour sacks. The wind howled outside, but inside there was only warmth and breath and the quiet certainty of 2 people who had known enough of loneliness to recognize real peace when it came. And at last it had come. The snow held through December, blanketing everything in a hush that made even the trees seem reverent. The wind came harder now, bending the pines near the ridge, and Nella had learned to seal the windows with strips of wool she'd stitched from the lining of an old coat. They burned pine when the aspen ran low, and the smoke from the chimney curled against the pale sky like a ribbon. Orin had taken to carving in the evenings. Working with smooth pieces of cottonwood he gathered near the creek. He'd fashioned a ladle, a spoon with a high neck, and once, a small horse that stood on its own legs. He didn't say why he did it, and she didn't ask. but she kept the horse on the mantle where the light from the fire warmed its grain. "Did you ever think about marrying before?" Nella asked one night, her voice quiet as she sorted dried beans into a burlap sack by the hearth. He didn't look up from the piece of wood in his hands. "Once. Long ago. But I wasn't ready to be steady. And she saw it before I did." She nodded, thinking about the long road behind her, how much she'd changed just from having a roof that didn't come with a price. He set the carving down. "And you?" "I was promised once," she said. "He was a cooper's son." Hands full of splinters, but he smiled at me like he meant it. Then his uncle offered him a place in Nashville, and he wrote me from the train station saying it wouldn't be fair to ask me to wait. Orin reached for her hand. "You carry it still?" "No," she said. "I just remember how certain I was. Like the world finally made sense. I didn't know then that certainty can vanish like breath on glass." He traced the edge of her wrist with his thumb, slow and quiet. "Has it come back?" She studied his face, good lines, softened by the firelight, and something gentler than time. "Not the same way. But it's steadier now. Less like a fire, more like a root." They held there a moment, the kind of stillness that didn't need filling. That winter, they began building a new chicken coop. The old one leaned too far east and had taken in snow through the slats. The work was slow, the ground frozen stiff, but they laid the foundation with stone and thick logs Orin hewed by hand. "You know," she said, holding a board steady while he drove a nail through the end, "I never thought I'd be good with tools." "You're better than most men I've worked with," he said. "You don't waste motion." She grinned. "That's because I used to sew for hours. You learn to keep your fingers close to the work." By the time they finished, the coop stood solid and square, with a sloped roof and a latch that kept tight in wind. She'd painted the door with leftover whitewash, and he'd carved a small sun into the beam above it. On the first clear day of January, they rode out to the northern edge of the property to check the trap lines. She wore a scarf he'd given her, rough wool dyed with walnut hulls, and he carried a rifle across his saddle. They didn't speak much, just moved in rhythm, the horses cutting careful paths through the snow. Midway through the route, they came across a fox caught by the leg. It was still alive, breath coming fast and shallow. Nella dismounted first. "We can't leave it," she said. "I'll end it clean," Orin offered. But she shook her head. "Let me." He handed her the blade without a word. When it was done, he watched her brush snow from her coat and wipe the knife clean on her skirt. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, but something in her shoulders had changed. "You're not the same woman who walked out of Red Flats," he said. "I know. You're stronger." She met his eyes. "I was always strong. I just wasn't seen." After supper that night, she reached into the high shelf above the hearth and pulled down a cloth bundle. She unfolded it on the table, a length of blue calico she'd been saving since before the frost came. "I want to make something proper," she said. "Something that says I belong here." He didn't ask what. Weeks passed, and the fabric turned into a dress fitted with long sleeves and a high collar, stitched with care. She only wore it once, on a morning when the air was still and the sky stretched wide and bright. "You look like spring," Orin said, standing in the doorway, hat in hand. She turned toward him, eyes steady. "I want to marry you." He stepped forward, slow, as if not to break the moment. "Say it again." "I want to marry you." He reached for her hands. "Then let's do it. No preacher, no paper. Just me, you, and the land that's held us both." So they stood there, by the birch tree near the creek, with the horses watching from the pasture and the wind soft through the grass. They said no vows, only held each other and promised in the way people do when words are too small for what they hold. And when the sun rose the next morning, it rose on a home made not from wood and stone, but from two people who'd built each other back into the world. By February, the days stretched a little longer, though the ground stayed locked beneath snow. Nella had taken to mending in the afternoons by the window, where the light held. She'd started a quilt from leftover muslin and scrap flannel, no pattern, just pieces that fit the way her life had begun to. Orin had begun building a cradle. He didn't say anything when he started, just brought in a plank of pine one morning and set it against the wall. But every few days after, he'd work it smooth with the draw knife, shaping careful curves into the rockers, sanding the edges until they felt like river stones. Nella noticed his hands lingered on her waist more often now when they passed each other in the cabin. She let them. Some things didn't need to be spoken until they were ready. One morning, while she stood outside shaking out a rug, she heard the low sound of hooves on hard snow. A wagon creaked into view along the road, drawn by a pair of aging bays and driven by a man in a worn capote coat. She stepped down off the porch as Orin came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. The driver raised a hand in greeting. "Name's Whit Jorgensen," he said. "I'm trying to reach the settlement west of here. Got turned around 2 nights back when the storm came through. Lost the trail. I saw the smoke from your chimney." Orin nodded. "You're about 8 miles off. You'll need to circle back east, then cross the shallow bend at the river." Whit glanced toward the sky. "Won't make it before dark. Would it trouble you if I stayed the night?" Orin looked to Nella, and she gave the faintest nod. "You can bed the horses in the lean-to," Orin said. "There's room in the loft if you don't mind a straw mattress." Whit's thanks came quick and grateful. Over supper, he spoke of his wife waiting with her sister in the settlement, of the small claim they hoped to put up come spring. He had the look of a man who'd seen too many winters go wrong, but still held a glint of belief behind his eyes. After he'd gone to rest upstairs, Nella sat with Orin by the hearth. The fire burned low, and the cradle frame leaned beside the door, its shape almost whole now. "I didn't say anything," she said, "because I didn't know for sure." Orin set down the tin cup in his hand. "You do now?" She nodded. 2 months along, maybe more. I didn't plan to be a mother again." His hand found hers, fingers warm and certain. "You aren't alone this time." She looked at him a long moment. "You really mean to raise a child with me?" "I mean to spend every season I've got left beside you. Whether we raise 1 or 5. Whether the fields grow tall or grow quiet. I'm yours, Nella." Her breath caught not because she doubted it, but because some part of her had never truly believed peace could last. "You're mine too," she said. That night, they lay close beneath the weight of the quilts she'd made, the air outside still and sharp with stars. She felt the slow rise and fall of his chest behind her, his palm resting against her belly, steady as a promise. The snow began to melt by March's end. Crocus buds pushed through near the base of the birches, and the creek ran louder with thaw. They cleared the pasture of fallen limbs, mended the last of the fence line, and turned over the soil behind the cabin for spring planting. Whit returned with his wife, Ruth Ann, in early April. They brought seed potatoes and a sack of barley in trade for a few of Orin's carved spoons and the extra harness he'd repaired over winter. Ruth Ann was heavy with child herself, and the 2 women sat in the sun, shelling peas and speaking softly while the men unloaded the wagon. "I never thought I'd feel safe in another woman's home," Ruth Ann said. "But it's quiet here. You can breathe in it." "I didn't know what safety felt like until I had it," Nella replied. By late spring, the cabin had grown fuller with small things: a basket of cotton swaddles, a shelf newly built for drying herbs, a second chair for the porch that Orin carved one morning when the wind was too high to ride fence. The cradle was finished, polished with beeswax and lined with soft flannel Nella had stitched by hand. It stood beside the hearth, waiting. The child came one warm night in August, with the full moon rising soft and gold over the pasture. Ruth Ann came to help, and Orin stayed close, his hand never far from Nella's shoulder, his voice low and steady through each breath. Their son was born just after midnight. They named him Elias. He was quiet, wide-eyed, and long-limbed, with Orin's dark brow and Nella's chin. He took to sleep easily, and when he cried, it was never for long. In the weeks that followed, Nella sat often by the open window with Elias in her arms, watching the wind move the tall grasses. Orin would come in from the fields with dirt on his boots and a softness in his eyes that never faded, no matter how hard the day. "You've made this a home," she said one evening, rocking Elias in the dusk. "No," Orin replied. "You did. I just built the walls." She looked around the room, the shelves lined with jars, the quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the cradle gently swaying. "We both did," she said. And it was true. They never left that land. In time, the orchard they planted bore apples, and a second child came, a daughter with Nella's eyes and a laugh like wind through cottonwood. They raised cattle, mended fences, and shared long silences that spoke louder than any words. Neighbors passed by sometimes, needing help or offering it. The porch always had a second chair, and the coffee pot never sat idle for long. Years slipped by, marked by harvests and snowfall and the slow turning of trees. But the love between them never dimmed, only deepened like the roots of the birch tree near the creek, quiet and unseen, but strong enough to hold through every storm. And so they lived together, whole and deeply known.